They had a fucking great merchandise night where they sold an absolute fucking ton of merch. It was a really good show. It was like a sold out show. By the time they got their fucking merch cut, they owed the venue money on the night. Their merch cut that they had to pay the venue was more than the guarantee the venue was paying them. They literally paid that venue to play that show.
Hold on a second. What?
You are listening to the Metal Command Podcast.
Welcome back to the Metal Command Podcast. Tony here with you. And today I'm here to talk about t-shirts. That's right. You know those $40, $50, or even $60 t-shirts that you were paying for when you go see a band play live? Well, guess what? Even though many people out there complain that the band is charging an insane amount of money for a t-shirt and that they are robbing their fans, the reality is that most bands, in fact, many bands, do not make the amount of money that you might think from a t-shirt. Now, the common misperception is that these t-shirts maybe cost $10, $12 to make, right? And the band is upcharging an insane amount of money and charging $40, $50, $60 for a t-shirt. However, there is a lot more that goes into the cost of producing that t-shirt than you might think. Number one, you have the cost of obviously producing it. You have the cost of designing it. You have the cost of transporting that merchandise from city to city or to various cities so you don't run out of merchandise. And then, of course, you have the ever famous, wonderful thing that bands absolutely love. And when I say absolutely love, they absolutely hate. And that is the ever famous merch cut. And then what little profit is left, you have to take that profit and pay your sound guy. You got to pay your guy that's selling the merch. And then you split it up between band members. And then after you get whatever is left, the crumbs from the table that are left, then you got to pay taxes on it. So I am here to play an interview clip to you that breaks down the cost of a t-shirt. And on top of that, there is a very messed up story at the end of this where a band sold so much merchandise. And actually, after asking around, I found out that this has happened to many bands who don't say anything. And I will get into that reason as to why they say nothing about it after this interview clip. But a band sold so much merchandise that after the merch cut, the check, the amount of money that the venue took from them because they sold so much merchandise, the amount of money the venue took from them exceeded the guarantee that the venue was going to pay the band, that the band had to actually pay them to play there and made no money. So I want you to check out this interview clip and then I'm going to make some comments after it. But folks, this is what goes into the cost of a t-shirt. This is the negative impact merch cuts have on a band. And I'm going to make some comments after that as far as the story at the end, as I just alluded to, as to why bands have not made a bigger deal out of owing venues money after they had a big night selling merch. Check out this clip. It's with myself and Justin Roth of the band Workhorse. And by the way, Justin owns a screen printing company. He designs t-shirts for bands. He designs t-shirts for businesses. He does his own screen printing as well for bands and businesses. So check it out. And I'll talk to you right after this clip. You make t-shirts, correct? If I'm correct, you do.
I own a screen printing company, and we do a lot of band merch. Yeah.
Okay, so you do band merch. So let's break this down.
We do stuff for businesses and other people, but yeah, I'd say the bulk of our business is really kind of shifted towards merchandise for bands.
So let's break this down. You go to a concert. Now, when you go to a concert, t-shirts are anywhere from $45 to $50. Okay, correct? Am I wrong?
No, you're 100% right. I think smaller. Okay, so I would say if you go to a club show and it's a small band, and by small band I'm talking they're playing a 250 cap or less room. You know, bands like mine, bands like our friends in Tyrant or something like that. I think Tyrant sells their shirts for like $25 or $30. And then I would say when you get to the club level, which is where merch cuts come in, so you have to factor that they're losing anywhere from 15 to 30%. I think shirts jump up to like, $40 on is kind of the low side. And, Iron Maiden and some of these other bands, they're $55.
So let's talk about that. Let's break down that money, because here's the thing. A lot of people don't understand like how little a band gets from that. Let's say the shirt costs $45. Okay.
Yeah.
Break that down. How much goes to where? Like the cost of making the shirt, when the venues pretty much rob the bands and take a merch cut. Then you got to figure, the cost of transporting it, then you got to figure out, then whatever's left over, then of course the government comes in and obviously takes their cut of it. So how much does a band really get out of that shirt? Like break it down. What are like roughly, you don't have to be precise, but break down what percentage of that $45 goes to who?
All right. So I think let's work on this thing backwards. Let's work from the start. Let's get to why they're selling their shirts for $50. And then we can figure out how much they get out of the shirt. But the reason that these bands are charging $50 is that, like you said, that first off, they've got to have them made. And we could talk about the cost of making them. And I can tell you one of the things, this is one of the biggest things that I see. I see this because I do a lot of merchandise for bands, but I also do a lot of design work for bands. And when I design shirts for bigger bands that have contracts with like some of the bigger merchandisers, and I won't name names, but like when I send that stuff off to their printer, a lot of these guys are just brokers. A lot of these guys don't have print shops. So they have contracts with all these bands and they drop ship their merch to them, but they turn around and farm that out to another print shop, and then they charge them shipping and then the whole 9 yards. So like by having contracts with these big merchandisers who are very convenient, I'll give them that, because that's what they do all day. They're very good at getting the stuff there. They're great at the logistics, but they are a hell of a lot more expensive than if you were to say, no, you were starting your tour in, I don't care, Nashville, and finding a local screen printer in Nashville to print your stuff and knowing that you're going to want to re-up your merch in, 7 shows, and in 7 shows you'll be in Colorado, and getting a screen printer in Colorado to run some more shirts for you or whatever. If you wanted to do a little more work, you could save a hell of a lot of money on merch. To give you an idea, like just a normal shirt, just say it's like 3 colors on the front, maybe it's got 1 or 2 colors on the back. Something like that through my company, we would charge, depending on the quantity and the brand of shirt you wanted it printed on, that shirt may cost you $8 roughly. Let's call it $8.
Okay.
That same shirt through one of these big brokers is probably going to cost $20 to $25.
Okay.
So right off the bat, you're talking a difference of 300%.
Sure.
So let's say they've got $25 in a shirt. Let's say that by the time they drop ship the stuff, let's say that adds another, 50 cents to $1, depending on what zone they're in and where it's going. So they end up with a few $100 in shipping costs. Now they've got to pay their merch seller, because their merch sellers on a big tour, especially, they're working on a percentage. So they're probably paying their merch seller anywhere from like 5 to 10%. Plus the guy's keeping his tips. Smaller tour, maybe they're just paying them a day rate. Maybe they're paying them $100, $150. So you got that cost every day. And then your venue turns around and this is the real kick in the nuts. They don't take 15 to 30% of your profit. They take 15 to 30% of your gross sales. So if you sell that t-shirt for $50, but let's say by the time all is said and done, you've got $30 in expenses wrapped up in that shirt, you've only got a $20 profit. But what's 30% of a $50 shirt? It's $15. So that $20 in profit you made, fucking 15 of it is going to these criminals at the venue. So you're left with $5 for yourself on a $50 shirt. That's between 10%.
Split between 5 guys, and then of course the government comes in and gets their taxes off of it. Absolutely.
And like I say, you got to pay your merch seller, you got to pay your crew. You've got expenses. So that's why these dudes are charging so much for shirts. Now there are some ways that they could save money. Again, I think that people, it's no different than you hear the horror stories of like, major labels and 360 deals and all this sort of stuff. I mean, they're basically signing up for the same shit when they sign with these big merch sellers, because if you had that extra, anywhere 15 to $20 or whatever, the difference is in having a shop like mine print it and a shop like, one of these big drop shippers print it. Now you've padded your profit by $20. Now when you got to give these crooks at the venue their cut, it's not as painful. Mm-hmm. So I think there's some ways they could save some money there. I heard a really, I don't want to sidetrack too much, but I heard a really funny story the other day. We just got back from that super clusterfuck of a music festival that blew. I know you saw all the posts online. Yeah, we just got back. Yeah, we just got back from Blue Ridge Rock Festival. Me and Murphy were there. We were with Exodus and Biohazard, and Gary Holt told. I mean, I want to say it's a funny story, but it's kind of infuriating. It's kind of fucking ridiculous. But Gary was telling us about a show they played where their guarantee was X amount of dollars. I'm not going to divulge their business or anything, but
right.
They had a fucking great merchandise night where they sold an absolute fucking ton of merch. It was a really good show. It was like a sold out show. By the time they got their fucking merch cut, they owed the venue money on the night. Their merch cut that they had to pay the venue was more than the guarantee the venue was paying them. They literally paid that venue to play that show.
That is absolutely absurd.
How fucking crazy is that?
That is absolutely absurd.
And I guarantee you, that's not the first time that's happened. When you look at some of these bands that are kind of, quote unquote, like t-shirt bands, if the main thing you're making your money on is merchandise and you've got a smaller guarantee, I bet you there's a lot of bands that end up writing checks to the venue for merch that is bigger than the check the venue hands them for playing.
Now you have a better idea of what goes into the cost of a t-shirt and why t-shirts cost anywhere from $40, $50 to $60 at a concert. And you also got a really good idea of how bad the merch cuts screw bands, how bad it screws bands when venues basically steal. In my opinion, it's stealing. Let's be honest. But venues take money from the profit of those t-shirts, and the band is left with very little. And then they have to, and then you have to understand too, the band has to also pay the sound guy. They have to pay for all of their other expenses. They have to split whatever crumbs are left from that money between each other. Let's say there's 5 guys in the band, so you split it 5 ways, and then you pay taxes on it. So now all of you have a better idea of the cost of the concert shirts and what goes into it, and of course how bad merch cuts screw bands. Now, let's talk a little bit about the story at the end where he talked about Exodus having such a big merch night. They made so much money that when the venue took their merch cut, it exceeded the guarantee. It far exceeded the guarantee that the band was getting from the venue to play there, that the band had to write a check to the venue and pay them to play there and made no money, which is insane. Now, I wanted to find out from bands, how many other people has this happened to, right? Because in that actual interview, which I linked in the show notes, I thought to myself, how many other people could this have possibly happened to? So I happen to know some pretty somewhat high profile bands, and I started asking around about this. I will tell you that everybody was reluctant to discuss this with me, but I ended up getting quite a few people to admit that this has happened to them. So then my question is, well, why aren't you speaking out about it? Why aren't you going out and saying, hey, this is what happens to us. This crap needs to stop. Well, I will tell you why. Every single one of these people told me, and even the people that manage them told me, the reason that we don't speak up about this, number one, it doesn't happen all the time, obviously. I mean, it's not happening at every show, but it can happen. And the reason they don't speak up about it is because they don't want to burn a bridge with a certain promoter or a certain venue and basically get blackballed and not allowed to play that venue anymore. A lot of these musicians are also afraid that, because, venues aren't going to go out in public and say they do this. Many of them probably would deny it. But behind the scenes and behind people's backs, people talk, right? And what many bands and musicians, and I'm not talking about Metallica and Iron Maiden or anybody that's on that level, because they can pretty much dictate whatever they want. I'm talking about like mid-level bands, smaller bands, bands that really don't have that huge audience. They have a good following, but the thing is, they can't always dictate their terms as well as, say, Iron Maiden could, right? They're afraid of burning a bridge and then getting blackballed to other venues and other promoters who then may not book them. I know that sounds absurd, but this is what was said to me. And I'll be honest with you, the story Justin talked about with Exodus, it's happened. It's a lot more common than you probably think. Again, it's not every show, because if it was every show, nobody would be playing anywhere, but it has happened. It might happen 1, 2, maybe 3 shows out of a tour where they're playing, 30 venues, but it does happen. And this is why things need to change. Because if you think about it, think of it like this: the record label, the venue, the people working at the venue, the people working for the band, all of these people get paid before the guys in the band get paid. And the ironic thing about that is the musicians in the band that are getting paid the least amount of money, that are last at the table to eat, none of the aforementioned people I just talked about would even have a job if it weren't for these musicians. The industry wouldn't exist if it weren't for these musicians. And that's the messed up thing about it. But now you know what goes into a t-shirt. Now you know how badly merch cuts really do hurt bands. And feel free to leave a comment. If you like what you saw and heard in the podcast, of course, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment on the video. Check out Workhorse. They have a great new album out called Confession, and you can see my review on that on my podcast. And thanks for Justin Roth for breaking that down for me and for all of you, because it makes a lot more sense to myself and other people knowing what goes on behind the scenes and goes into the cost of a t-shirt and how bands get screwed by merch cuts. So with that said, thanks for watching. Stay metal.